Okay, great. So back to where we were. So I'd just like to open the floor up to ask what people think is the reason we have the ancient tree inventory. So feel free to write any messages. Feel free to write anything in the chat or come off mute.
I think Chris has raised his
hand.
Mm.
Yeah. Is that all right? Can I talk? Or?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's important to make sure they're in a central place, so they're recorded, especially if there's issues of something being built or near there, or something like the railway,
HS2.
HS2, that one, yeah. So it's very important to get them into a central place to see how old they are, to see how many ancient trees we've got. Because I think UK has got some of the most veteran trees in Northern Europe or something, haven't they? So haven't we? And it's good to shout about what trees we have, and it's good to know where they are so we can look after them as well, and keep them as long as we can. I think that's important.
Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely. We have quite a few other people saying in the chat. So we have conservation, research, education, to be able to protect, to have more information on the species, influencing government policy, that's a good one. Raising awareness of the value, absolutely. Biodiversity. I mean, you're all hitting all the points, folks, so that's great. To give them the respect that they deserve, as well as everything else we've said. Yes, giving them the respect is absolutely it.
Katie said at the top, protection, which is an interesting topic because we'll talk about that, won't we, May, later?
Yes, indeed.
What kind of protection this offers or doesn't offer.
Exactly.
And Jeremy's talking about monitoring long-term change to trees and our landscape, I guess.
Absolutely,
I
absolutely.
think someone wants to say something, I think.
Yep, go ahead.
If you come off mute, if you want to speak.
Oh, can I speak?
Yes, we can hear
please.
You. Yeah, so the unique biodiversity place in the ecosystem, the historical and cultural value.
Yes, thank you. That's absolutely true. I mean, all of these things are exactly what I was going to cover. So well done, everybody. It seems like you all have a lot of knowledge about why we care and why we should protect these very important habitats. So indeed, so let me just go on to the next slide. So someone had mentioned that they're used for conservation. So the ATI is a conservation tool in itself within its own right, because it kind of tells us, well, where are they? Where are these ancient and veteran trees? So as you can see, we have this kind of interactive map that we use as a way of kind of locating where they are. So we can kind of see what their distributions are. And then as well, some really important pieces of information about them, such as their size and what age they might be based on their girths. So we want to know where our oldest trees are, because the UK is indeed one of the places in Northern Europe that has the highest concentration of ancient and veteran trees. And the ancient tree inventory is just a springing board, really. I mean, we have about 210,000 records of ancient and veteran trees at present, but we had a PhD student called Vicky Noland who kind of predicted that was about only 10% of what might actually be the true kind of presence of ancient and veteran trees. So really, really important kind of conservation, having this tool as a form of conserving these trees. As well, we have kind of this idea of them being habitats within themselves. So, the way that you would look at a mature tree probably doesn't offer as many micro habitats, as you would call them, as an ancient tree, because as you can see in some of these pictures, they have all of these kind of really interesting characteristics, like the burrs and the kind of swelling and the holes and the hollowing that you see, especially characteristic of ancient trees. And so things like saprosylic animals, so that's saprosylic just means that a species is dependent on decaying wood at one point in its life cycle. So saprosylic invertebrates, birds, and bats kind of depend on these trees, and especially some that are even rare species. So you know, the idea of them as microhabitats is really important for like preserving that biodiversity as well. We also see a lot of things like epiphytes as well on trees, so things like fungi and liverworts and mosses. So also really important kind of symbiotic relationships with these trees. So I think if I could just go to the next slide as well. So as I mentioned before, you know, these trees are definitely as well a conservation tool. Um, you know, it helps us to inform things like planning, environmental management and planning. So for example, the trees that you see in this image are two ancient oak trees in Maka's Park. And as you can see, they're part of an ancient, well, they're part of an ancient woodland pasture. But, you know, I don't know if you can see kind of the bike path that goes between them. So that's obviously there's been quite a lot of footfall in that area. So how are we able to kind of notice the presence of these trees and then effectively manage them and make sure that they, you know, they remain and they continue to live out their lives? As well, we look at the designation of sites. So do we want to kind of assign a specific protection for a site depending on how many ancient and veteran trees there are? You know, for example, the JNCC, which is the Joint Nature Conservation, oh, I forgot the last words, but
Committee.
committee, thank you. They mentioned that for a site to have high kind of biological ecological value, part of it there needs to be a certain high concentration of ancient and veteran trees. I think the number was around like 5 ancient and 50 veteran trees. So that's quite important as well, knowing where they are. And as well, we talk about site management and so you know, we want to make sure that we plan for their protection and find where the most ancient, where the most vulnerable trees are. And finally, planning applications. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit, especially around the kind of the national policy planning framework in the different countries in the UK and how they can be applied. So I'll talk about that in a little bit. And here we see a tree protection area, or maybe you've heard of the term tree protection order. So obviously there is some kind of protection for trees in general in the UK under this kind of tree protection order. However, I'd like to just point out that these tree protection orders aren't necessarily designated to all ancient and veteran trees. They can only really be applied in amenity residential areas. So, you know, if you have like you have ancient and veteran trees on places where you would find them most really. So places like your ancient medieval deer hunting grounds or on private land because the landowners had just kept them there for many years. You might not necessarily be able to order a tree protection a TPO order. Thank you. And we also have something called the National Planning Policy Framework, which is also meant to protect trees to some extent as well. But as you'll see, they do have some shortfalls because of their wording. And but thanks to the ATI and the Ancient Tree Forum as well and other partners, we've managed to get ancient and veteran trees up the agenda a lot more. And hopefully the trees could stand a greater chance in the future. So this kind of site is something we definitely don't want to see. So things like vandalism and the tree breaking off potentially unnaturally. So, you know, whilst the ATI it can potentially even help to prevent harm to these veteran trees because we can document these kind of wrongdoings for these important trees And examples like these really resonate with people and help to raise awareness. So, you know, this kind of vandalism as well can be shown on the ATI, can be used to kind of, I guess, advocate for these trees and campaign for them as well, which I'll say a little bit more about, and the work that we do at the trust with that. In terms of the kind of the policy frameworks around planning, they sort of differ from country to country. So in England, especially, this is the one I'm most aware of. The idea is that we kind of development resulting in the loss or deterioration of irreplaceable habitats, like ancient and veteran trees, should be refused unless, and this doesn't say this in the slide, but unless there are wholly exceptional reasons and a suitable compensation strategy exists. Now, I just want to bring that to light a little bit, because the idea is saying, well, the development that causes the deterioration of ancient and veteran trees should be refused. However, the word should is quite well, it isn't. It should, there's quite a lot of interpretation around the word should. And as well, I'd like to highlight the fact that, the term exceptional, unless there are wholly exceptional reasons and there is a suitable compensation strategy. Well, as we mentioned, these trees are irreplaceable habitats. So what potentially, what potential suitable compensation strategy would there be? It would take hundreds of years for these trees to look the way that they would again. And, that's obviously, it's obviously an issue. So in Wales, we also have the fact that it says ancient, veteran, and heritage trees are irreplaceable natural resources, such as trees and woodlands. They should be afforded protection from development, which would result in their loss or deterioration. So quite similar as well for the planning policy of Wales. Again, the word should is there, but I'd like to talk a little bit about a case of Scotland, where there was a revision in the late 2022, early 2023, where there was a kind of fourth revision of the national policy framework, whereby they had changed the word should and made it a much stronger language. So, now it says development proposals will not be supported where they result in any loss of ancient woodlands, ancient and veteran trees. So that's obviously a lot more that's a lot more robust, and they've really put their foot down. So it's really great to see that in Scotland, and this kind of language potentially would there would be less kind of flexible space for there to be any kind of damage or development that tries to like jump through any loopholes. So it's really good. And finally, Northern Ireland. So the planning policy goes as follow, that planning permission should only be granted for a development proposal which is not likely to result in the unacceptable adverse impact on or damage to ancient and long established woodland. So I don't know so much about the Northern Irish one, to be honest, but it's this is what it says. And so in terms of the purpose of the ancient tree inventory, we also talk a little bit about kind of opposing planning applications which affect ancient and veteran trees. So we have a really wonderful kind of we have a wonderful team at the Woodland Trust called the campaigning team, and they work very, very hard and they'll often work on 900 to 1,000 cases at any one time. And these are kind of planning applications that they're looking through, and they look at the ATI to see whether there are any kind of ancient and veteran trees under threat as a result of that planning application, and they cross-reference it on the ATI. So in this particular case that you see in the picture with the pins, this place is called Aldermaston, and it's an ancient wood pasture, and there were plans to turn it into a housing estate, but that would have been lost if that obviously would have been lost if the application went ahead. And however, because this ancient wood pasture is also an irreplaceable habitat, the application failed and it didn't go ahead. So That was really good. And then we have another example of the Caversham oak, which is found in Reading. It's 8 meters in girth, probably a bit over 8 meters now, and was under threat for building from the building of a new house. However, we had 3 ancient tree inventory verifiers that brought the campaigning team's attention to this tree, and they were able to successfully campaign for this tree, which triggered like people to write to their local councils. And in the end, in August of 2023, the tree was saved and the application was withdrawn. So that was a very big win. And just interestingly as well, this tree was a lookout post for parliamentary forces during the Civil War in 1643. So obviously has a lot of history. And often these trees they are often heritage trees, meaning that they hold a lot of historical significance to people. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So I'll move on to my next slide. And as well, the purpose of the ATI, someone had mentioned this earlier, is about research as well. So we have a couple of things that I wanted to highlight. The first one being that Vicky Nolan, so one of our a PhD candidate at the University of Nottingham, had generated a model with kind of different variables around ancient and veteran trees like soil type, altitude, to kind of predict more or less where you'd be likely to find an ancient or veteran tree. So she did this just in England, but we are trying to kind of extrapolate that now to Scotland and Ireland, but was able to find through already the presence of ancient and veteran trees on the ATI and some sampling that we did with some of our verifiers through targeted surveys, that up to 1 million trees were still kind of have not been found and are predicted. So she's predicted that through this model, and that wouldn't have been possible without the ancient tree inventory kind of data set. So it's really, really excellent research. And secondly, we have the Scatter project, which is a project that's kind of coming into the limelight a little bit. We're expected to hear more about it in the summer. It's done by a couple of postdoc researchers at the University College London, whereby they're looking at kind of laser scanning techniques, so LiDAR, if anyone's heard of that, to measure the exact shape and size of ancient trees. So they started with the ATI because we were able to locate 38 really impressive ancient oaks for them to kind of test this technology on, to kind of better understand understand trees, these ancient trees, because often when we are trying to calculate things like carbon content on ancient trees, it's a lot harder because, as you saw, they don't look like mature trees, and that, you know, the trunk doesn't kind of look the same. It's not homogeneous as you go up. It's very kind of, it's very gnarly, as we would say. So it's a really great way to kind of have predictive model of carbon above ground content. And we'll be publishing those results on the ATI as well. And also this picture that you see is a redwood tree. So one of the trees that one of the species that they've looked at were redwoods, which are doing surprisingly well on in the UK, even though they're originally from California. I think our oldest redwood at the moment is about, oh gosh, I think it was 500 years old, but that I don't remember exactly. But they're predicted to do really well and live out their entire lives in the UK, even though they are, you know, foreign trees. And finally, we just have Alios Faron's book about ancient oaks, where he used the ATI to write a book about oaks. He's really, really, really fascinated by oaks. So yeah, lots of uses for the ATI, as you can see. So just a little bit more about the roles at the ATI. So so me, I'm, as you know already, I'm May, and I'm the citizen science officer. So I'll be the first point of contact for when you become verifiers, hopefully. And you can contact me on that email address, so ancienttreeinventory@woodlandtrust.org.uk. And then we have David Alderman, who is our head verifier. He's also the director of the tree register for the British Isles. So they specifically are a charity that look at champion trees. So that's like the most kind of impressive trees of the UK. So that will include the tallest trees as well as the fattest trees. So we often do a lot of data sharing with David's charity, and he also works as a contractor for us to kind of help us with technical expertise and advice on verifying trees. He's truly an ancient tree encyclopedia. And last but not least, we have Tim Kellett, who is here with us today. He's one of 4 different lead verifiers. We also have Alan Hunton here today as well. And he's been with us for 12 years, I believe, and is a long-standing verifier and trainer as well in his own right, and is currently leading on the Dartmoor Ancient Tree Hunt. So he'll tell you a lot about Devon ancient and veteran trees. So as well, we have other roles for the ATI. So we have recorders. So these are people that, such as yourselves, because you've been on the ATI and successfully recorded some trees, that it's basically open to anyone. Anyone is able to record a tree. That means that, you know, you can open your telephone app or sorry, I shouldn't say app. It's you can just open your phone on the website and record a tree, and so that makes it a citizen science project. And finally, next to that is verifiers. So those are the people that we train up, like today, and they are kind of the curators of the database, I would say. So verifiers are the ones who are kind of looking around their area and seeing any kind of new trees that have been added and making sure that that data is accurate, that it's it's up to date. So they'll take pictures of the trees, they'll write comments to recorders, and just make sure generally that what we have on the ATI is good quality records. It's often a kind of solitary thing to do, but you are, as Tim said before, you can always make it a group thing. You can always kind of meet up with people in your area. So at the end of the course, we'll get you in touch with the lead verifiers who will be able to kind of tell you about the other people in your area. And if you'd like to opt into being part of a WhatsApp group as well, that's a really good way, for example, to share pictures of trees or ask any questions. I'm personally not allowed to champion that on too much because it's not really GDPR compliant anymore, but I know that it's been very helpful for verifiers, especially new ones. And finally, lead verifiers, who are just the ones who have been who just have a bigger outlook. So they'll often know who their other verifiers in their area are. They'll have a better kind of understanding of the ancient and veteran trees in their area, and they'll do a lot more kind of coordination of activities. So I think what time are we on? Okay, I think we are going
We've
to
got
take
a few more slides on the ancient tree. Did you want to do those now?
Oh yes, sorry, of course. Yes.
Yeah, you've just got enough time there.
Yes, so I'll just give you a little bit more about why ancient trees. So we've already spoken a little bit about this, but so as you know, they have a really important ecological value. As you can see here, this is a beech tree with multiple kind of wood decaying fungi brackets. So I don't know if you can see this one over here, but I think this is artist's bracket, but I could be wrong. And this is really important, and it's a really kind of crucial aspect of the ancient tree life cycle. It's the fact that these kind of decaying fungi grow on these trees and hollow them out from the inside, but it's a completely natural process. So there's nothing to be alarmed of. It's the way that these ancient trees continue to live out their lives, and so you'll have this kind of hollowing process that happens where the fungi will eat on the different aspects of the the wood, and over time this will create really nutrient-rich soil on the inside, and you'll even have kind of adventitious roots sprouting down and rerooting because of how kind of deeply like nutritious the soil is within the tree. Um, so as well, this is called brown cubical rot, and it's a scarce wood decaying habitat. So just more cool rot. Here we have uh, the ecological value of the gnarly features, the kind of ancient features of the trees. So here you see a small hole or pocket of decay. If that gets filled with water, that would be a great place for birds to come in and water in, and mammals potentially as well. So obviously all this great kind of mosaic of habitats for different species. As well, we have the kind of cultural value of ancient and veteran trees. So in this picture, we have a pollard tree in Madrid. So this is in our where our neighbors live, and it's on a working landscape that is managed by herded shepherds. But as you can see, um, the kind of pollarding serves as a way of kind of cutting down the wood for fodder for the livestock as well as for firewood. So, we grow with these trees and we live with them. Um, as well, here we have a lapse pollard in a place called Ashted Common near London. And it's called a wishing tree. So an important heritage tree here, which has a cultural link because the tree gets visited by people, especially school children, who leave wishes in the form of ribbons tied to the branches. So, a real shame if these trees, ever disappear for anthropological reasons. Um, Here we have probably one of the most famous trees in the UK. So the major oak, maybe you've seen that before. So this is in Sherwood Forest in Nottingham, and it's considered one of the kind of potential.
Thank you for that. May's back now. Mm. Okay, what we're going to do next is we're going to go onto the Jamboard again, and I'm going to share a screen. Just hang on a moment, just in case people can't see it. Now, I've still got a blank screen on that Jamboard. I don't know what's happened. Has anybody else got a blank screen? Somebody's taken the stuff off. It doesn't matter. We're going on to page 2 of the Jamboard. In the center of the top of the screen, there is a number and an arrow, so you can move on to different pages.
They're all blank.
And I'm going to share my screen. Can you see a blank screen on the front now? That's what it looks like at the moment on the Jamboard. Okay,
they're all blank.
that's fantastic.
Oh,
We want a blank one. We want a blank one. So I'm on page 2. Can you see at the top, if you can see my pointer, there's a little thing with arrows on either side. So I want it to say 2 of 4. Okay. And what you will do with this is if you scroll over to the left, you can click on a sticky note, and that image will come up there. You can change the color if you don't like yellow with these things on the top, and then you can put a click in the middle of the colored area and you can write anything you want. And when you've written something, you press save and it goes onto the screen. I can cancel that now, and you can see my sticky note is on the screen, and I can pick it up and move it around. I can even make it smaller, bigger, whatever. So that's how to put a post-it note on the Jamboard. And what I want you to do on this is to use your experience, and they're all different. I know that from talking. What characteristics do you look for that's going to help you decide whether a tree is ancient or not? What characteristics, looking really close, looking far away, what are you looking for in the tree that is going to hint to you that it could be an ancient tree rather than a notable, a veteran tree, an ordinary tree in the landscape? So, what I'm trying to get rid of mine. I'll just cancel mine, edit, duplicate, delete. You're doing great. Change the colors if you want. So we've got girth and we've got wide girth. Well, they're both right, obviously. Wide girth and big girth is the thing we'd be looking for there. And somebody's been more explicit there by saying on the trunk. So wide girth on the trunk is a key indicator. Hollow trunk, that's really good. Can't always tell whether a trunk's hollow, can you? It could be hollow inside, but you might not see an opening to it, which is interesting. Dead wood on the ground and canopy. So dead wood, we're presuming, is important to let you know it's an ancient tree. Girth. Somebody said soil in the cavities, but they put another word in there. It says tree soil. So that's something interesting. That's something that's different from ordinary soil. So it's being formed within the tree in cavities, hollow areas. They're still flying in. Flying trees? What's a flying tree? Who's put that one in? Interesting. I think better get someone explaining that. Past management, e.g. pollarding, that may indicate a tree that's older than girth alone would suggest. That's good because, well, I've got some pictures on that. We'll have a look at that in a bit. Evidence of bats. Wow. It's quite hard actually to know for sure unless you're an expert at bats or you can watch them in the evening coming out to fly, whether there are bats in there. But that is certainly a characteristic if you be aware of that. May, this list is going bananas. I've never seen a bigger list. Location in a deer park. Yeah.
I can't
Yeah,
get a
that's
sticky
good.
note.
Pardon?
It won't let me get a sticky note.
Oh no. So you scroll over to the left hand side and you click that little symbol there. Click. And that comes up in the middle of your screen. And that's the one you type on. And when you press save, it will stick it on the page.
The red squarey thing in the bottom right corner.
No, not that.
Right.
No. Can you see my arrow that's ziggling around on the screen? No.
Yeah.
Yes. If you go over here to this symbol, it says sticky note there. On the left-hand side of the screen. Air trees.
I'd like to know what air trees are. That
Sorry,
sounds
I
really
can't see that.
fascinating.
Right, here's air trees. Who put that on? And it's really interesting. What does that mean? Would you like to explain that to anyone? Whoever put that?
Yeah, that was me. That's just a term I've known it as of another tree that's growing inside the canopy of an existing tree. So like there's a beautiful example of some rowan trees with their roots coming down from an old pollard, just growing out of soil made in the cavity of an older tree.
I like that one. We tend to call them also cuckoo trees. So it's a new, like a cuckoo bird in a nest, it's a new tree that's found its home inside an older tree. Somebody's got cocoa trees there as well, you see. So they're very
Someone
similar
called it
things.
Flying tree as well, it's been said.
Is that what the flying tree one was? Okay, fungal fruiting bodies, epiphytes, those are plants that grow on plants, retrenchment. Interestingly, if we just have a pause here, some of these things you will definitely see on veteran trees as well. Some of them are more likely to be on much older trees. So the hollowing, things like that. Antler branches. Do you know what those are, anybody? Anybody want to explain what antler branches are? No. It's also known as stag's heading, yes. It's when the upper branches of a tree
Branches
die
get
off.
too heavy.
No, it's when they die, the upper branches. And so you're left with a tree canopy lower down and these things that look like stags' horns coming out of the top that are these dead trees. And that's a characteristic of this thing here, which is retrenching. It's when a tree grows a lower crown. I think we'll stop there, please.
It's getting
but
out of hand.
it's not, well, it is and it
It's
isn't,
not
but
working.
it's fantastic. You've
But
got
it's great. You're so
so
knowledgeable.
so
Yeah.
much experience there is showing up. I'm presuming all of these things have been seen on a tree, so that's fantastic. Okay, brilliant, brilliant. Right, I'll go back to the presentation now, and we'll study that later. We'll keep that properly recorded for the day's activity. So I'm now going to do this. Oh, sorry about this. I've just got to flick through some slides to catch up.
Oh, it didn't work for Chris. Sorry, Chris.
What's
I
that?
think we'll probably move away from the Jamboards the next few
Yeah,
sessions, so don't
I
worry.
don't like the Jamboard actually personally, and it didn't work. And I've used them before, and I just think they're a bit messy. And
Okay, we'll have a think about that for next time. We're not going to do another Jamboard like that today, so don't worry about that. So I'm going to move on from here and just look at some of those characteristics a little bit more with some images. This is one of the most important features of an ancient tree, and it's the large girth, and it's certainly not the single thing that we have to look out. But when you're looking for trees out there, you're looking for trees that are short and fat. I'm not talking about Tom in the middle of the picture, but I'm talking about the tree he's hugging around there. So that large girth, looking for that sort of dark shape when you're walking through the wood pastures or woodlands, that's the thing that signals to me there's something interesting there. We'll look a bit more about girth later. Retrenchment. I mentioned this, so if you look there, you can see the start of that stag's heading on the branches that are dying at the top of the tree. And what happens is when a tree gets very old, it finds it very hard to support the canopy very high in the crown. And it's to do with the size of the rings and the pressure that's required to push water and nutrients up to that height. Now, what it does, though, to compensate for that as it gets old, it starts to grow a crown lower down. Younger oak trees will be much taller than this, but this then starts to produce twigs and branches lower down and producing this crown, and it lets the upper branches die off, and that is a process called retrenchment. Ted Green, the founder of the Ancient Tree Forum, always says ancient trees grow downwards, and that is where this flavour comes from.
Sorry, Tim, just to say that Henry has a question. So go ahead, Henry.
Thanks, Henry. Go on.
Sorry, that's all right. Sorry, Tim.
Which is interesting. One of the trees that I've sort of seen quite recently, it's a maiden in its maiden form, and it's the canopy is full all the way down around the top, but within the canopy there seems to be lots of branches that are starting to show the signs that you're just talking about there. So
Yeah.
is it more that actually, because I didn't realize that it was just sort of the top of the canopy, what you said there about not reaching the top? Is it
Yeah.
more just that, or is it other branches within the canopy as well? Just to
It could.
trees.
It's more likely, Henry, to be the former. The topmost branches go, but a tree may also reduce some of the inner branches in the canopy and put all the effort into the outer ones that can absorb more light, which is important for photosynthesis. So you do get both things happening. It's
So
not straightforward.
maybe more of a veteran that might be then, and in time it might become more ancient as it struggles
Yeah.
the outer. Yeah.
But certainly look for that retrenching, that growing downwards, the stag's heading at the top, and the formation of a newer canopy lower down. That is definitely a key factor.
Amazing.
So
Thank you. Yeah.
okay, so this is hollowing, and we all know what hollowing is all about. We know it's hollowing inside the trunk. I'll tell you a little bit more about tree aging in a minute, but the hollowing will start usually inside the trunk, and often you won't be able to see a gap like you can see here in this yew tree in the churchyard, but the fungi basically will find a way into the tree or will be present throughout the tree's life, and once that inner core dies off, it will start to recycle that timber, and eventually that might break down into sections. The tree might break down into sections and even become fragmented and separate trees with gaps in between them. So the key hollowing of the central core, and also big hollowing on some of the branches, the big lower branches are important. And the reason you get that separation in the tree is that these functional units can be readily recognized on ancient trees, and that's where there are vertical elements of the trunk that begin to be recognizable and separate out. And it's the way trees work, really. It's like a vertical section of the tree connects branches above it on that side only, right down the trunk to roots that connect on that side only. So branches, stem and roots in this sort of vertical arrangement are all very strongly connected. And sometimes you can see one of these vertical functional units actually dying off and becoming hollow, the bark disappearing because the branches are dead or the roots are dead. And you can see how in the earlier slide here, it's actually breaking up into those functional units. So it's not always as easy to see as that on the screen at the moment, but that is a way a tree will age over time, when you can see that separation. Really old trees will start to regenerate themselves in different ways by layering or suckering this one. Now, what you're looking there in front of the church is the Torchworth chestnut, and it's the biggest, oldest sweet chestnut in this country. And the trees on the left are parts of that main tree. So the main tree has spread its roots quite wide over centuries of growth, and then those roots have developed new stems which form effectively new trees springing up around the base of it. So the tree on the right that is really craggy and gnarled and hollow, that's the original chestnut that has it's retrenched, it's dropped back down to this hollow large area, but the suckering has then allowed the new stems to come out on the side. So it's one of the ways trees over time will spread themselves and regenerate themselves, and each one of those new trees has got good roots underneath it. So at some point in the future, the old bit of that sweet chestnut in the centre will eventually have decayed away, but some of the trees will still be remaining on the outside. It's a fascinating story. Here's epicormic growth. Remember I talked about trees retrenching. This is the new growth that's starting to sprout up lower down on the trunk of the tree. And originally that tree would have been much taller with higher branches, but for some reason that it's the upper branches have died off, the stem of the tree has
Tim,
died off, and it's growing the new ones. Yes, May.
just to say that actually a little bit of context for this tree. This tree was actually burnt down because there was a lamp post next, an electric post next to it. So it was burned, and then that's why you wouldn't be able to that's why you see a lot of these branches sprouting out through epicormic growth, and it survived because of this. And then it was then like they continued to try to chop it up in the crown, but it just managed to survive even then. So like a few years later, I think in the 70s, they tried to chop up the crown, but then as you can see, these kind of dormant buds on the tree, which is the epicormic growth, just continued the tree's life. So I thought that was really interesting.
It's fascinating, isn't it? So those are actually quite thin branches, in other words, relatively young branches lower down. That's a really good story. So how come trees can live so long? There's a lot of interesting science and philosophy about this, and some people might say that trees don't have a programmed life, that they will all live to, a bit more like we do, within certain decades. But their life is affected by external conditions. And where those conditions are positive in a certain way, trees can live for many centuries or even thousands of years. When those conditions are poor, they may die within 10 years. So we're talking about a different life cycle. So let's look into that life cycle a little bit and look into how a tree grows and how it ages, because this will affect a lot of what we're looking at when we're examining ancient trees. So here's a cross section on a tree, and I'm not teaching people to suck eggs. I know lots of you know lots about this, but I think it's worth just going through. Some people may not know everything, and you just might find a little bit of extra information in this. What we understand from a tree, the way it grows, it gets larger as it grows older. It gets larger because a new ring is added to the tree, generally for 99.9% one a year, one ring. Each ring has a dark bit and a light bit, and that is the spring growth and then the summer growth, and that dark bit allows you to be able to count the rings, which is quite convenient. And the ring grows underneath that part of the tree called the cambium, which is a layer just underneath the bark. And the cambium will split its cells to create a new ring around the edge of the tree, and it will also on the other side grow part of the bark. So as that bark wears down, it will grow a new bark there. And each one of these rings that grow through cell division grow at a different rate. You can see the different thicknesses within this tree girth here, and the things that will affect that growth and also the final girth of the tree are the species. Certain species grow faster than others, have larger girths. It will be the soil conditions. If there's a lot of good soil and nutrients, they will have larger rings. Drought conditions. In a drought, the rings will be quite small. When there's plenty of water supply, the rings will be larger. The extent of the canopy. If it's got a full canopy, it will need a large ring to draw up lots of water and nutrients. If the canopy gets cut down, perhaps like when it's a pollard, when the upper branches are cut, it will only need a small ring to deliver in that next year the water and nutrients in. So and the maturity of the tree. So when a tree is growing in its younger years, its rings increase and are quite big, and they're increasing because the canopy is growing each year. And when it reaches a certain stage, the canopy doesn't grow anymore, so the rings will remain the same. And when it gets very, very old and very ancient, those rings might become so small. So there's lots of things that affect how big that growth of the tree and the rings are. In the picture here, you can see the two colours. So there's a lighter outer and a darker inner. And the lighter outer parts of the tree are called sapwood. And that's the living part of the tree. And that part of the tree is taking nutrients up into the crown of the tree, is taking water up and is effectively passing down carbon compounds to enable growth of the tree. All that is happening in this sort of edge of the tree, the sapwood area. The heartwood in the middle, the darker area in the middle, is actually dead on most trees. It's not functioning. So it's functioning as a structural element, but it is no longer functioning to carry water and nutrients up into the tree. And there are certain trees, we call them ripe wood trees, such as a beech or a turkey oak, where this distinction of light and dark sapwood and heartwood is not so distinctive. It's more of a very gentle change from the inside to the outside. But most of our local deciduous trees, for instance, have this distinction. And that's really important because it's this dead, dysfunctional heartwood of the tree that is the part of the tree that can be easily recycled by fungi and by invertebrates. And that's a positive thing, or even by the tree itself. So when we look at the tree on the left here, you can see that inner core is hollow, so that has already been recycled by fungi and invertebrates. So a tree doesn't have separate organs like we do in hearts and lungs and so on. It's got this composition inside that we've just seen in the image. So it can function even if part of the tree is actually missing. Like I said, this functional unit, the tree on the far side of here is all alive right the way down to the ground, right up to the branches above. All of that is part of a functional unit and works. And on the left, that functional unit's been completely cut away, but the tree is still alive and will still survive. So on the right, you can see how the tree can cope with severe damage, fire damage on one side, and has started to replace some of the branches and canopy after the fire damage has happened in that case. So it's got an enormous amount of flexibility to keep going and keep living, even when conditions apparently, well, they would certainly kill off us humans if we were in that situation. So we've got an idea of how the on the left, how we have new layers each year, the hollowing section, why that's happening in the dead wood in the centre. We know in the crown there is a lot of flexibility in how it grows. It can grow new branches lower down when it doesn't want to use the upper branches of the tree. It can develop new epicormic growth, as we call it. The buds are always there in the tree, and they're asleep. They're latent buds effectively until the tree signals we need to enliven these and get them to grow again. So those latent buds are always there. And we know how the tree can regenerate down on the ground level by suckering and even layering, which is one of the branches when it falls outwards and then touches the ground and then creates new roots in the ground. So it's how a tree can effectively extend itself to create a new tree a few meters away from it. I call it trees are walking. So trees can move over a landscape at a very, very slow pace. But effectively, that's what they're doing. So ancient trees, you can see a graphic image here of the time scale of an oak from its very, very early start in year 1 right up to year 800 on the right hand side. We know oaks can go over 1,000 years, so that's quite interesting, but you can see the scale and the shape, how that changes over time. So you can see the largest canopy is this period when it's like fully mature, about 200 years old, maybe 300. Have you heard the thing about the tree growing for 300 years and then maturing for 300 years and then slowly declining for 300 years? That's kind of the story you can see here in this image. And the ancientness of a tree, in our terms, in terms of classification, we generally, when we're talking about oaks, we're looking at that happening at about the year 400. So when an oak is 400 years, we are then assuming that we call that ancient. But that is only part way through this huge lifespan of the oak. So we really have to be aware that this amazing period of time when there's so much value culturally, habitat, ecologically in the tree can go on for hundreds of years. Moving on from that, I think we want to actually get some hard and fast work on some of these definitions.
Tim, before we do that, sorry,
Yeah.
I'd like to add one more thing, if that's okay.
Please do.
Could we go back to the previous slide? Thank you. I think also one thing to mention, because someone had asked in the chat, why in theory, because trees can reorganize themselves like this in so many ways and you know have very, very long ancient life stages, could they potentially live forever? And I think I just wanted to answer that by saying no, because I mean, I think someone had mentioned that maybe one of them did, I think like a hedge elm trees if they don't get elm disease. I didn't know that. That's really interesting. But for the most part, I think it takes quite a lot of effort, I think, over time for the tree to add that ring around itself. So eventually that becomes more and more difficult as the tree kind of gets bigger and hollows out and almost like turns into all these different functional units, that these kind of rings become thinner and thinner. And so that makes it much more difficult for like, I suppose, the nutrients from the roots to get to the crown, even though the crown has retrenched. So eventually there would start to be like a decaying of the tree overall. One thing as well that you wouldn't see in this oak, this fabulous stages of the life stages of an oak, is that if you look underneath, often when the tree is in its mature stage, it often will have a large tap root. So it'll reach further deeper into the ground, and over time, those roots kind of start spreading out, and it no longer invests in that tap root. And so over time, that also reaches a point where it can no longer support itself. So I hope that makes sense a little bit.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
Tim.
Yeah. No, I didn't see that question, but I think it's really important that we know that for instance, oaks won't live forever. And I think it's all of those factors that gradually accumulate over an oak's lifetime will gradually kill off another one, another one, another one of a certain age, until there's only one oak that's over 1,000 years old. But having said that, you do need to realize that some trees can live for 5,000 years when the conditions are right. And I'm talking about pine trees, the bristlecone pine in America, where that's been carbon dated. And I think the conditions there are very extreme, very arid, very cold. And those conditions there have stopped the fungi operating as effectively as they do in this country on these mountain ranges where the bristlecone pine and the invertebrates. So those very factors that will slow down and decay that tree over a long period of time are not operating at the same rate in that kind of an environment. And when some of these factors are taken away, the lifespan of that tree can be extreme. And I think that's quite interesting when we're looking at upland trees and more remote areas. The trees may be small, but the length of time that they can survive there in those difficult conditions once they're established can be huge. So anyway, there's two sides to that story. Thank you. Definitions then. Everybody who's doing a verifying course wants to know exactly what an ancient is, what a veteran is, and what a notable is, so that they can mark it down on their sheets. And I'm afraid it's not going to be quite so straightforward for you all, and you're going to have to learn quite a lot of different things to piece together a bit of a jigsaw around each tree. Some of them will be flipping obvious, like these two trees we've got here. So we've got Old Knobbly on the right there with a big hollowing, a wonderful oak with very low branches. It's grown in an open wood pasture for centuries. It's got massive girth. You know that is ancient. It's got all the wood decay characteristics. It's got the retrenchment. It's very small, very low canopy. It's got all of those features. On the left there, there's an ancient lime in North Yorks, Duncombe Park, that one. And again, it's got that evidence of suckering and probably layering. Some of those, the limes are very prevalent to layering, branches coming down and rooting again. It's got that huge scale and that hollow interior. So those are relatively easy to see, and you recognize them by those characteristics, which are very obvious in this one. So we're looking about those main features, and we're fairly confident that we're able to say it's one of the oldest of its species. And that is a clear indicator. And some of the work that we do on verifying, we actually start to define a kind of an age as one of the things, the pieces of this jigsaw that we put together. So it definitely is one of the oldest of its species, which is interesting because, as you'll see in a minute, different species live to different ages. Amazing. So that's the ancient. A veteran tree, on the other hand, it's a mature tree, so it's not a youngster, so it's in its mature life stage, and it has a girth that is corresponding, equivalent to that life stage. So it's not going to be as big as a a 5 meter girth ash or a 6 meter girth oak or something like that, but it's just much smaller. But it has to have those critical deadwood features that create this really superb special habitat. So it's got them younger in its life than some ancient trees might have had, but they're well established. And we're looking for hollowing in the main stem, the trunk of the tree, or hollowing in the buttress zones where the roots start to form at the base of the tree, or in big major limbs of the tree. So we're talking about substantial bits of dead wood that is created through hollowing in large sections of the tree. We're also looking for other features that might be one of the things we recognise by the habitats, by holes and pockets that have allowed species to live in them, epiphytes that are growing on the tree, really knobbly bark, evidence of bat features, bat habitats. But the critical bit is if it doesn't have that significant heart rot or main hollowing in big branches or the trunk, then we shouldn't be putting it down as veteran. Now, I do want to say we've already talked about planning, and we now know through all of that evidence that veteran trees can be protected in planning applications as well as ancient woodland. Because they're irreplaceable habitats. But so therefore your evidence of saying this is a veteran tree may be called into question at some point if there's a planning application in the area where that tree's been identified. Your statement of the fact that it's a veteran isn't a legal definition. It's not a legal designation, like somebody talking about a listed building. That's a legal designation. This isn't. What you're doing is an advisory thing, but we really hope that this advisory role that we've got will have a big impact. And if we've defined something as a veteran tree and an application comes up, then we hope that the local authority will fully take that into account when it's making a judgment on that. So the ancients are relatively easy to define and to recognise. Veterans are not so. So just bear that in mind. Below veterans, we're looking at notable trees. Now, please remember, notable trees are not just trees that are just not good enough to be a veteran, but are nice big trees anyway. That's not right. What we really have to identify is that it is large or distinctive in its environment, and it will not have the guarantee of those characteristics of veteran or ancient trees. But there has to be a particular reason why this is distinctive in its local environment. So a whole wood of coastal redwood trees might not be, but maybe one on its own that is outstanding in its environment, like on the left there, this is a giant sequoia, and is worthy of noting down as a notable tree. And that one was recorded by, no, it was verified by the ATI's youngest ever verifier, Aidan Champion. Don't know how old he was when he did that. The tree on the right there, which looks like any other kind of urban oak tree, youngish urban oak tree, it does stand out in its environment in that location, but there's this little bit of an extra story that this was planted as part of a citywide public housing scheme in Bristol that was to provide homes fit for heroes returning from the First World War. And this was planted by the Lady Mayoress in 1919, and it was referred to as Addison's Oak. That was the name of the Lady Mayoress. And it was a big commemorative tree for this huge housing development, providing housing from people from the First World War returning home. Interesting, I know a lot of the Sheffield trees that were cut down were also commemorative trees to soldiers coming back from the First World War. So there might be another distinction in the tree that would say this should be notable. So that's giving you a starting point for that classification of trees. So tree growth, I said, isn't always the same with every species. And on the left here, we've got a hawthorn, a relatively small tree, but beautiful tree. I really do love recording these in estates, deer parks, on the moorland and things like that. On the right, there's a rowan tree and hazel alongside, and these are yeah, beautiful but small trees, but please don't overlook these. These are wonderful parts of our landscape and can be immensely valuable habitats. And I think that we just got to be aware that these are a lot smaller than the bigger oaks, ashes and beeches and sycamores that we see around, but nevertheless can be fantastically valuable. So we've got to understand that these are maybe trees that are only 1.5, 2 meters to you know, maximum 3 meters girth for a single stem. But they often do occur in multi-stem groups, which are several stems all connected together in the rooting area. This is a really interesting graph. It's not actually telling you anything about ages of trees, so don't get confused. I'll show you something later that does do that, but this is just talking about girth sizes and species. So the colours designate whether we are looking at something that's kind of young and maybe notable if it has the other characteristic features as being distinctive, and that's the dotted light green. And then you've got a bit of solid light green blending into the dark green, which is when it becomes more likely to be a veteran. And then you've got the dark green, which is the girth sizes when it's more likely to be ancient. And the dotted dark green is when it's likely to be very, very ancient. But it's not about age, it's just about girth sizes. So you can see an oak tree in the middle might grow ancient about 5.5 in certain conditions, meters girth, 6 meters girth, right the way up to 12, 13, 14 meters girth. And there are some. Amazing. So you've got that big span. Right down at the bottom, the hawthorn, perhaps we're looking at less than 2 meters girth, and it could still be classified as ancient, right up to maybe 3 meters girth. The yew tree is one of the oldest growing trees in this country, and that could be ancient from about 6 meters, 5.5, 6 meters, right up to 12 meters or such dimension. The yew tree at 10 meters girth will be much older than an oak tree at 10 meters girth. So the rings on a yew tree are really close together. It grows very slowly. So that's useful, not in terms of aging, but am I looking at a tree that is roughly in that kind of zone of interest? So it might be handy when you do some surveying. So the rate of tree growth is also relevant not just to the species, but also to the conditions that it's growing in. The climate, the soils, the altitude. We said upland trees tend to be much smaller for the same age because they're more exposed conditions. The soil is less, the amount of water might be less. these key factors will slow down the growth of the tree. And also whether a tree is affected by pollarding or something like that. If you come in and chop the top of the tree off, it's got no canopy for quite a few years till it eventually grows again. So it doesn't need new tree rings to be very big, because it's not transporting as much water up there and nutrients. So those tree rings will be very, very small. And you see that pattern if you cut a pollard tree across the middle, you'll see large and small in a cycle every 10 or 15 or 20 years. This is a really good example. Moccas Park again. In Moccas Park, amazing ancient trees there, loads and loads of veteran trees. It has trees, that's an example on the left of a veteran tree that's 7.6 meters girth, but they're calling that a veteran because they know it's not 400 years old, because they've got evidence when it was planted. And on the same site, not very far away, there is an ancient tree that is only 5.1 meters girth. So why is that? Does anybody want to venture an option to say something? Just mute if you do, and maybe make a quick suggestion.
Well, one thing I was wondering about is whether they're standing alone with other trees, or whether they're growing amongst other trees, so that then they won't have so much girth, but they could have the same amount of age. Whereas a maiden tree standing out on its own, it might then have more girth.
What? Who's said that? Sorry, what's your name?
Sorry, my name's Henry Redhead.
Henry, spot on. You've taken the answer right out of my mouth. It's exactly that. When the Moccas Park was originally a wood pasture deer park, it had had a lot of trees, a high density of trees, and lots of trees surrounding some of these that have survived. But when it was more recently changed over the last few centuries, many trees were cut down, and a lot more trees were planted with lots more space around them. And these are like the veteran trees that have grown. So the ones that had more space, less competition in their early years, grew really big and fat. But the ancient ones that grew up in the early part of Moccas Park had a lot of competition and grew up fairly narrow and small. So the surroundings of the tree, as well as the soil composition, are going to distinctly affect the growth. This is an example of a graph which indicates how different growth can be affected, in this case from oak. And this has been prepared by John White, who's an ex-Forestry Commission researcher. He's collected lots of data. And on this graph here, you can see girth increasing across the bottom, age of the tree increasing up the side, and therefore you can say along this line 400 years, which I said might be a good one to call it ancient. You would say in the brown line, which is the champion, the ground where all of the trees are like champion trees, they're all big and fat, you would expect a 400-year-old tree to be something like 7 meters in girth on that graph. Okay, which is pretty big. But if you looked in a dense woodland and you found a tree that has grown up throughout its whole life in a woodland, a 400-year-old tree might be only 3.5 meters girth for the same age. And that's some of the data that he's collected from actually coring trees, cutting down and counting rings. And in between, you've got the different levels of, is it on poor ground? Is it an average site? And you've got to think about where you're doing your surveying. If we're doing some surveying up on Dartmoor, we're going to be calling all of the areas we look at on the moor poor ground. So if we're looking for open grown oaks, we'd be looking along that pink line there. But if you're in central England or southeastern England, when there's a lot more soil, a lot more nutrients in the soil, you'd be looking at a good site or champion, sort of these two curves. And John's done these graphs, which are in the a Woodland Trust Ancient Tree Forum book. You can even get by PDF. He's got this for about 10 different species. Very interesting, very useful guide. So classification of trees, we know lots of different things affect the age of the tree. So you're starting to look at these different characteristics, the way the tree is managed over time. Has it had some damage? A pollard can perhaps happen once when a tree is struck by lightning, or when it's much younger, it's been cut off or eaten by herbivores, so it could lose all of its upper canopy naturally, and then grows in a pollard shape. It could be struck by lightning, it could be branches could be blown over by storms. So you just have to be a little bit aware of the background of the tree. How close it is to other trees. Is it overshaded by other trees? Has it always been in a woodland? Or is it a tree that's been in open pasture and people have just let the woodland grow all around it, taking away the grazing animals? When we're looking on the Woodland Trust site, you get lots of indications of tree form, and you've got to write down tree form. You've all done this. And there's always some when people say, I have no idea, is this a natural pollard, a lapsed pollard, or a managed pollard? And you need to be a little bit more aware of the distinctions between them. And there's plenty of advice on that. A maiden tree in the top left here is a single stem, unaltered by human hand. A pollard over there is where there's regular pruning about 6 foot off the ground, out of the reach of grazing animals, and you get a thicker bit of the tree at high level and a thinner bit at low level, and then thin branches coming out. A coppice is when that cutting of the tree happens at ground level, and you get large stems coming out roughly the same size. A multi-stem, the coppice, that cutting of the tree would happen every 10, 20 years, just like the pollard, but it would happen at a lower level. A multi-stem tree is where all of the tree branches actually connect at the ground or just above the ground, and you can recognize that it's a single tree, but it's grown naturally in that way rather than being coppiced and cut down. Natural pollard over here is where that pollard cutting at high level has perhaps happened once during its life through some natural circumstances. Sometimes it is quite hard to recognise that. What we do find that this open grown maiden trees in wood pasture have branches really low down to the ground and very wide spreading branches, and sometimes they look a bit like pollards, but they're not constantly cut. The phoenix tree is one that's fallen over onto the ground, but it hasn't quite died. It's still got some roots intact, and it starts to grow new trees effectively from side branches that are pointing up to the sky. So you get this horizontal base, and new trees in the tree architecture of the new stems is copying an upright maiden tree. A cliff tree can be any tree that is growing in rock on the side of a cliff, on a tor, that kind of element where the roots have had to search long and hard to find some good soil in between the rocks, and these grow very, very slowly. So it's good to identify that as a tree form. A coppice with a high stump is a coppice that's all connects together. It's cut at a high level, usually on a stump that is about 1 meter high or something of that nature. Some of these were added later on into the ATI because people said, oh, you haven't got the tree form that I keep seeing in my local area. So we've had some of these. Laid hedgerow trees which had been partially cut and bent over and then whipped together and then allowed to form a dense hedgerow. That's another tree form that can be seen hundreds of years later. You can see trees that are bent over at right angles. And we do record stumps as well, because they are very high value for biodiversity. So you can reflect on these by going onto the website. So here's pollard ash trees. So it's all pollard ash trees. The one on the left, ancient, the one in the middle, veteran, the one on the right, or the two on the right, notable. You can see those differences in the actual depth, the width of the trunk, the hollowing of the trunk in the veteran. It started to get those features, but it is not such a huge base. And the one on the left has that really, really big girth and hollowing, which is classifying that as ancient. So you can see the 3 stages on a pollard ash there. Here is an oak tree. On the right, the notable tree stands quite proud in its landscape. It's a huge tree reaching up to the sky, single stem, no evidence of hollowing on the lower branches or the main stem. The veteran tree in the middle starting to get dead wood, gaps in the tree, starting to thin a bit at the top. Has hollows and pockets just starting to appear on the tree. Fairly large girth, classifying that as veteran. And on the left, short, fat and squat, but beautiful. There's the ancient tree. It's really low down. It's got all of the deadwood features, holes into the hollowing in the centre of the tree, hollowing branches, got all of those characteristics of the bark and so on. And there we go. That's the ancient status. So we've got like 3 categories. You can do that yourself to start to classify all of these species. And while I won't go into them in any detail, if you go on to the ATI, the species guides section here, you can click on any one of about 10 main species up there. Oh, it's 11 now. And it gives you all of the information that we'd want to know to help to classify the tree.
So I'll just chat through the last bit, which we were just going to talk about using the ATI website initially. So obviously, as Tim said, there are lots of kind of tricks and things to look for on the ATI. I'm saying ATI, I'm so used to saying it that way, but when I say that, I just mean ancient tree inventory, but please get used to me saying that because it's less of a mouthful. So just going back to, oh yeah. So using the website, I think initially we're not going to go too deep into like the verification process. So that we'll leave that till probably more into the 3rd session, where you'll get the chance to do it on your own, and then we can feedback and talk about it, and we can answer any of your questions. But I'll just take you into what you can start off by doing, and I'll give you a little bit of homework to do before next week, if that's okay. But the website is basically like your first point of reference when it comes to the verification process. So it's where you'll be able to navigate all the trees in your area, or even trees outside of your area, depending on where it is that you choose to kind of set your location. And I'll show you how to do that in a bit. And by the end of this session, I will have made everybody a verifier on the ATI. So that means that you can navigate the website as a verifier would. I wouldn't advise, doing any active verifying for the time being, but I would just, I'll let you know what, what we'd like you to do when you come away from this session. But basically, I'm just going to show you how to set up like a verify tree list, and then how you can like you can look at the maps and switch between like the list view and the map, and look at the old map as well. So I'll do that quickly. So I've created my account as if I were just a new verifier so that I can show you how it looks like with setting up my preferences. I think someone's trying to come in, so I don't know. I'll do that I'll do that. I'll let them in. Oh yeah, thank you, Katie. So I'll share my screen and show you. Sorry, I'm working on multiple screens. Okay, can everybody see this?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
Thumbs
Good.
up if you can.
It's
Yeah,
quite small
good.
feed.
It's quite small. Yeah.
Okay.
Uh.
Let's see. Okay, one thing about the website is it will crash sometimes, and that's just the fact of the matter. So I know you're probably going to have loads of questions and concerns about that, and you're very welcome to email me about them. So just so you know. One thing as well is once you kind of get on the website and you go into tree search, you'll be able to see the interactive map, and it'll take you directly to Sheffield. Apparently that's where the center of the world is. So, so don't be alarmed if you end up in Sheffield most of the time. You can just kind of navigate your way out of it either by dragging this part, so you can kind of drag the map around. And you can also search anything by town, postcode, or grid reference. So part of the homework will be looking into like using OS maps and the grid reference system. So far, we mostly use the OS kind of ordnance, so the ordnance survey, for anyone that doesn't know what OS is. And we also capture latitude and longitude, but you're welcome to use both of those interchangeably. So I'm just going to look into my area for the time being. And I'm now a verifier, so I see what a verifier sees. So what does that mean? I can kind of just see all the verified trees, so the ones that have the colors, and then the ones that aren't verified. So if I zoom in here a little bit, it might take a while. I see all the different kind of icons. So if you don't know this already, oh gosh, it's so it's so slow. I'll zoom out again, see if that works. So if you can see here, like you'll have the green icons. So those represent your veteran trees. And then here you have your notables, which are purple. And then the ancients are the ones in orange. And then this is the important part. It's the kind of unverified trees that are the gray icons. So I can click into that, and I'll show you a little bit more about how to amend records in the next section. Oh, okay. We won't do that for now, but I think we'll leave that to the next session. But for now, what I will show you is how to set your kind of your preferences so that you can kind of get going as a verifier. So if I go into my name, I have, so I've used my secondary email address here. Nothing I don't want to not share, so it's okay. And then I can find if I'm part of a recording organization, I can also say that I'm a part of that. So that means that whenever I verify a record or add a tree record, my name will appear with that kind of recorder organization. So for example, with Tim, he works with the Dartmoor Ancient Tree Hunt. So that's also a part of that list. So I can click that. But personally, I'm just an individual. So I'm just an individual, and then I can put my postcode in here. So this is my postcode. It's actually my old postcode, so no one can find me now. And this is quite important because this helps you this curates your tree list, and it shows you the distance that you're prepared to travel. So you can say all. So I've said all personally because I like to have a view of everybody's trees. But for the time being, let's say 50. That's kind of the maximum we expect anyone at any given time to verify a tree.
Is that kilometers or miles?
I think
I never known that.
it's miles, I believe.
All right, doesn't say, does it?
No. Oh, right. Sorry. So I think probably. Oh, why doesn't that work?
I don't know what you're trying to do.
It's try that. Okay. Well, it's not letting me enter my postcode for whatever reason. I think there's probably some issue with like the way it's reading it.
Put a gap in the middle.
Oh, there we go. Thank you so much. So then I apply those preferences, and that kind of that will curate my list of trees. So now if I go into verify trees, I can see the trees that will show up in the area that I've kind of the perimeter that I've chosen, so the 50 miles, and it'll show me a list of unverified trees. So I can click into those trees and have a look and see what the recorder has kind of what they've recorded. So, I can take a look at the girth. Okay, it's not gonna show me that now, unfortunately, because this is a new account that I've used. But yeah, if you click into the record, it should show you like the girth, where it is, and the kind of 10 figure ordnance survey reference, as well as the date, and then you'll be able to see other things. So I think for the time being, that's as far as we'll go, is just looking at like whether the tree is in the right location and if the girth is correct, and if potentially the pictures are associated with the actual species of the tree. So did the person properly assign, the tree as an oak tree? Is that correct? As well here, what you can see, and this is quite good, is you can swap between these two views. So you can either go through this is the list version. So I see them as a list. And you can see I have 621 trees within 50 miles from me. And otherwise, I can see it in a map version. So I can see all these trees here. And I think what's also really good is the satellite function. So this is kind of like the way that you would see things from a satellite perspective, but you can kind of look at it through different layers. So we have your kind of more basic road layer. And then this is quite interesting because it's the official like ordnance survey map layer. And then as well, if I had mentioned this in the chat, but if you wanted to kind of determine whether a tree was really, really old, some of these ordnance surveys date as far back, I believe. Well, actually, I don't know how far back they date. Does anyone know the answer to that?
Yeah, mid 1800s they were surveyed, and some of them have a date of about 1880 for publication.
Right. Thank you. Yes, that's
Could I
right.
just also mention here, May, so when you register as a verifier, you will see grey trees on the map, which you've not seen before. Normally the trees are green, orange, purple, but when you're a verifier, you start to see grey ones, and the grey ones are unverified. So if you were just to do a general tree search on a map, you'll see a mix and you'll have some grey ones in the ordinary mix. But here May is just going through her list of unverified only, so they're all grey.
Exactly. Thank you, Tim. And I think finally what I'll point out is that we looked at this, and then we can also use the location service. So this is, I mean, it's not extremely accurate, but I can kind of locate myself depending on your browser and whether you have accepted location services to kind of track where you are. And so looking at these kind of gray icons, you can just click through and see all the different trees that still are pending verification. So I think that's as far as I'll go for today. So have a play around with that. And I think what we will do is talk about a little bit about the homework, because there are some really interesting resources that I'd like everybody to have a look at before next week. I'll just share my slides again. Yep. Oh, 1 second. Okay, so before the next session, please have a chance to, if you have a chance, please go ahead and visit a tree in need of verification. So it could be somewhere quite close by. I wouldn't recommend traveling miles and miles to go see a tree. I think, especially as someone who's you're still, in training, we don't want anybody, getting too confused. But just have a look and see if the measurements are correct. If the description of the tree, if there's a description in the tree, and what the location is. Take some photos of the tree to add to the record, and yeah, and then bring those photos in for next time. And as well, we would recommend reading the recording guide, specifically the section on girth and tree form. And then also there are 2 videos on how to record grid references. So this is a really good way to, I think it's a lost art really, how you would kind of read a map and an ordnance survey map, but it's really useful stuff, and it'll kind of help you get your head around this kind of grid reference system on the ancient tree inventory. So I'll send that out to you as an email with kind of the details of this, and hopefully we can also share the slides with you by the end of this session as well. And I think that's it actually for now. So we have, oh gosh, we don't have that much time for questions, but if anyone wants to kind of stay on and ask any questions, Tim and I will be happy to answer them. And I just want to thank you all for coming. It's been a really great turnout, and really looking forward to seeing you next session as well. Thanks for all your fantastic questions and input. A lot of you have really good knowledge, so it's good to see. And someone asked me if I'd be able to send the recording out before next week. I'm not entirely sure. It depends on our content team and whether they'd be able to generate that recording. I'll do my very best. So hopefully, I can't promise that. Thank you,
So
Katie.
anybody got any questions? And please, because we're very close to 8:30, feel free to leave if you want to. Tom's got a question. Tom Harvey.
Firstly, thanks guys. Thanks May for hosting, and Tim for the presentation. It's been brilliant. Thank you. I just wanted to ask about the chart showing the relationship between girth and tree species. I just noticed that birch wasn't on there, and I wondered if you would maybe group that in with another successional tree.
Yeah, I saw your question in the chat on that. Birch are very small species. They don't grow to huge girths, and but they tend to be larger in girth than hawthorns and rowans and so on. But as a guide, when when birch do get into an ancient status, they're very, very dark, very, very craggy barks. They don't look like birch. When you see them at eye level, you can't see that typical birch white stem with the little marks on it. But if you're looking at a 3 meter tree, that's very big for a birch. Old birch will probably only go to about 2 meters girth, something like that. But of course you are looking for the other characteristics of hollowing on them. So again, a good way of checking is to go onto the ATI and do a search with the filter and search for birch that are ancient, and you can even restrict the amount of girth that you're looking at. So then you can see on the list a few pictures, lots of pictures of what people are putting down for ancients, and you can get your eye in on that. Henry?
Thank you.
Henry Redhead?
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Tim and May. Really interesting. Already looking forward to the next 2 weeks, by the way. I'm a bit of a geek about trees. I'm sure we all are. All right, I'm sure we all are. Actually, the question I've got is around private property and what is the situation for us to. Oh, I can see Alan's already realised that's the big one. Maybe I shouldn't ask this question now.
No, you must.
But you know, obviously then you have to have permission whether you can you know, verify on their property, but then also the protective, how does it then protect, or should I say stop them? Would it be that people will feel that that they won't want you to verify trees on their land because that means that they don't have then the freedom to be able to do what they want with their woodland, which is obviously kind of what we want, because we want to prioritize the trees. I've just found a stunning site that's a private property, and I haven't spoken to the people yet, and I will do very politely. But I'm just interested in how that works with this.
Clearly, you've got to get permission from the owners where you can't see the tree from a public access point. You've got to get their permission to record that tree. Okay. Now,
so if you can see it from a public access point.
If you can see it from a public access point, you can put photographs from a public access point on the ATI. You can estimate the girth. You can see if there are any recognizable features, so you can get a certain amount of information on. If you go up to the tree across the private fields and photograph the stem, you're actually giving them evidence you've trespassed. So be very, very careful about that. But you could hold back some information for whatever reason, and if you get permission you could put a little bit more on or go and visit the tree directly. So you do need that permission. Now there are ways and means that we can help you, or the Woodland Trust can help you get permission. One of those is a letter introducing yourself as a volunteer and what the ATI is all about. So it's a Woodland Trust heading. It will name you as a verifier, and it will also could indicate that you'll do some positive things for them. So the next thing is maybe you don't need the letter, but you want to make friends with the owner. That's a very important key thing, and have this respect and wanting to share something with them that will be useful for them. So are they interested in how old a tree is? A lot of people really are. Are they interested in learning a bit more about the history of their farm? Are they interested in the biodiversity? Find some little clue that will get you into a conversation even before you say, I want to record a tree.
Yes.
You know, I'm really interested in these, and I found this little bit about on the historical research, and you might be interested.
Yeah.
Do we have a chat? And it all starts from a chat. I think a face-to-face chat, if you send somebody an email, they'll probably not respond. They'll probably think you're very official and all the rest of it. So if you can get a face-to-face. The
You'll
last
find
thing,
about 2/3 of the people you approach will be very happy to talk to you,
Yeah.
and after the first 5 minutes, the chances are they'll start showing you around their estate and even giving you a cup of
Just about to
tea.
say that's happened to me.
Yeah.
yeah, it's great. I definitely
I
agree
couldn't
with
leave
that.
one property.
Oh.
Make sure you get a cup of tea. There is
It's
one.
more like handing me flowers and stuff.
No.
Oh, bless.
You can come down to Cornwall, Shane, and do some for us if you're that good at that.
I was actually at Whiteacres near Newquay only 3 months ago for fishing.
Wow.
So
Oh, really? Oh, I'd like to fish.
yes,
there
I
too.
was. It was absolutely hammering down with rain all week.
Right, there's one more thing very quick I wanted to say. Sometimes the owner can be very reticent and doesn't want anybody to know that they've got lovely trees on their site because it might attract walkers and visitors, blah, blah. There is a very last resort. We can record the trees, but we can hide them from public view. Okay, now we don't like that because then lots of other people can't see this wonderful bit of information that we've just been able to survey. But as a very last resort, if it's the only way to persuade an owner, and I've done this a few times, we get an agreement to hide the trees. Now, as a verifier, you can click on the list that shows show hidden trees. There's a button for that. So you'd be interested to see there's quite a lot that's hidden.
Oh. Well, that might be quite nice
That's fine.
because, as I said, this beautiful woodland I found that has a lot of ancients. There's no doubt about it. But they might be hidden already. It might be that it's been verified already.
We need to. Sorry, Henry. You just need to pass on to some other people. We've got a few waiting on the questions, if that's all right. Debbie.
Hello.
You
Yeah.
next.
Hello. Yes. I'm new to this. I've only recorded a few trees, so I just had a question about hollowing. And I've got a particular tree in mind which is an ash, which is very hollowed for quite a large part of its trunk, and it's also twisted and cracked, and it seems to have scar tissue, what looks like scar tissue at the edge of the hollow. But that some members of the public are very worried about this tree and also others because they see it as weak and it might fall down. And I just wondered if this is something that all you people come across very often, that you see these trees in these, you know, these possibly veteran trees, and people just want to try and cut them down because they think they're a safety issue. And you know, it seems to be a bit of a problem with this particular tree and some others around here. Whereas I think it's is it not true that it's actually could be even be stronger from being hollowed with the scar tissue?
Yes, if you imagine it like a cylinder, a straw, it can have flexibility but great strength still.
Yes.
And I think that's the imagery you need to convey to people.
Yeah.
That all trees hollow. All old trees hollow, even the ones they can't see the middle of.
I've told people this. I don't think they believe me.
No. Well, you'll gather evidence now. You're starting to verify, so you'll have you'll get lots of stories yourself.
Yes.
But ultimately, if it is a really dangerous issue and a big risk for somebody, you can do certain tests on trees to test the strength and the flexibility. But you have to pay a lot for arborists to do those, and in certain special circumstances it is worth doing that. But all you can do is just convey a general feeling at this time that there is a lot of strength still in hollow trees, and all trees hollow, and the best thing is to remove the target. if you can. So make sure people don't walk too close or sit underneath it or whatever.
Yes, it's leaning, but away from the path underneath it. It's leaning onto the field.
Oh, that's great.
Behind, so it's not. There's no way it would fall onto the path. And in fact, it has a barn owl box on the side
that's great,
away from the path, which I monitor. So I'm perfectly happy it's safe.
Okay.
But it's just other members of the public that think, oh, it's got that nasty hollow bit. It must be unsafe.
No. I think you can could even put a sign up and start to explain it to people. How much time, May? How much time do we have now? We've got a couple more.
We're going over time, so I think everybody who is still here is you're welcome to leave. Otherwise you can stay. Yeah. We do have a couple more questions, so if anyone who wants their questions answered wanted to hold on, we can answer those questions. But otherwise, please feel free to leave. I mean, it's getting into the late hours of the night now. So,
so Shane is next.
Thank you, everybody.
I was just going to say, Tim, that actually, even though I've had brilliant conversations with private landowners, there was actually a few times where I had one altercation where I had to leave because I had no proof that for what I was actually saying on the account of recording a tree and giving limited information. And hence I'm covered from neck to toe in tattoos and young, was very stereotypical of some of the landowners. And I felt on edge and quite set back on a few times. And I was wondering if there was anything around that, because I don't have like a badge or merchandise or something explicit to say what I'm here doing on your property kind of thing, rather than being like a salesman giving you double glazing quotes.
Okay. Over to you, May. Have you got some thoughts on it?
Yeah, I see what you mean, and I think that's really legitimate to kind of make sure that you're not some kind of rando coming in. We do have.
Because if I was old, pardon everyone else, but I'm only 34, and you don't every day see someone young coming up to your driveway unless they're going to steal something. But it's just one of those things where I'm always hesitant. I get the odd, not nice time entering their property, even when sometimes I even just hello, as they come out the door.
So I think maybe something that might help you is like a business card, which we can send. And I think that might just be a nice kind of way to legitimize the fact that you're a verifier. It is a voluntary role. So, I mean, ultimately it's up to the landowner whether they think you're a legitimate kind of actor or not. But I think, having kind of a business card and explaining what the project is and saying that it's this kind of citizen science project that's attempting to, locate all the UK's ancient. You kind of have to do a bit of advocacy, I would say, as well. Like it's kind of it's kind of hard to. Because I think some landowners they'll be really on board about their trees, and others just won't care as much. So it's just about how you sell it, I suppose, and how you kind of explain that, like, what we're attempting to do. And some of them will, like as Alan said, most of them will comply, will be quite friendly about it. But
May, you'll also find, if you remember, well, you won't remember, but Tim will, back in 2010, we did have little business cards, little cards, which said ancient tree hunt verifier, and we would carry that around with us so we could show it to people.
Yeah.
So
that's fantastic. You
can request the card, Shane, and we can do the letter up in some form that may not be just to one owner. It might be a general letter of introduction. And I also think having some, if you've got something to carry stuff in, having some information about the age of trees, different species, some of the grass,
Oh, I go
that
around with
kind
a
of stuff.
clipboard, so
Yeah, okay. That it just to be able to point and show somebody something, it shows you're a real surveyor and researcher about the tree, and then you can relate that to their site, to their house or their land. Good
Right,
point
yeah,
though,
thank
but
you.
we'll follow that up. Thank you.
Yes.
Richard, I think. Richard next.
Yeah, just follow on from Debbie's point on tree safety. I'm also a tree warden, and we always say explicitly we're not qualified to give tree safety advice. You would have to ask that. I might say that I can't see any signs, or I can see signs of hazard from this tree, but I'd always qualify that with I'm not qualified. You would need to see a tree officer or arborist professional for a official diagnosis.
Good
Is that the
point.
same with
Thank
woodland
you.
trust?
Yeah, yes, it is.
Yeah.
I mean, we shouldn't unless you're qualified, and some verifiers are qualified as arborists, QTRA people, so who do the safety tests, but most of them are not, and it's absolutely fair to say that you're not giving professional advice.
Yeah,
at
I
this
personally
stage.
can't give that advice either. I'm as, you know, as a citizen scientist, like I have some notion of ancient tree protection and management, but for example, it just wouldn't be in my remit to give. So, you know, we have to hand it over to the
However,
arboriculturalist.
that's right. However, you can talk about examples. You can say, I do know of a tree that was very much like this in this situation, and all they did was X, Y, and Z. That was very interesting, wasn't it? So you
Yes.
can talk by your knowledge and examples without giving particular advice to that tree.
It's also
And
quite important to remember the fact that, like, we spoke about this, but trees need quite a lot of space to get to their ancient life stage because of all these kind of buttressing and the rooting that happens like more like laterally over time. So actually, I mean, I spoke to Emma Gilmartin about this, and you need like, I think you need like 8 times the length of the crown, so where the crown reaches, to consider how far the roots may expand. So, I mean, things like, you know, it's very common that you'll have like, what's it called? Compaction of the roots because, you know, the kind of the things, there are so many, like we saw in the Caversham oak, for example, there was this kind of fence next to the tree. Often people will like park their cars next to a tree. If you go to the Grantham oak, there's a driveway almost 2 meters away from it. So it is useful to know these things and as Tim said, like speak about examples, but indeed we can't give
I just say the planning standing advice indicates the root area that needs to be protected as a buffer zone for a veteran or an ancient tree should be 15 times the diameter of the tree's stem. That is a rule that is in the legal standing advice. It's not in the BS, which is something like 12 times, but in the standing advice that is covers the MPPF, 15 times the diameter, not the girth. So that's just giving you an idea about protected area around you know, old trees. Who's next on here? We've got Shane again, or was that from last time, Shane? And then
You're
Chris
on mute,
afterwards.
Shane, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was just about to say you answered it just right at the end for me.
Oh, thank you.
I was on about the protection of the stem of the tree.
Yeah. Thank you. Chris Harris.
Hello. Thanks very much for tonight. Two things. Firstly, I've looked on the ancient tree inventory because I put a couple actually in our garden and they're quite old, very old. One's 6 meters in girth, the other's about 2.5 to 3 meters, but I can't see them on the map. of the inventory? Does it take a time to get on there, or is it only going there when someone's checked them?
They will only be seen publicly,
All right.
by everybody when they're verified.
All right. Yeah.
When they're not verified, they will be seen by the person who's put them on and any verifier. So they'll be limited at the moment until they get fully verified. But if you put them on, you should be able to see them. So there may have been an error. They do take a little while to go up though, Chris. When did you put them on?
It was last week.
Oh no, they definitely should be there. So there's probably been
and it took a long while. It took ages
You
to
logged in.
get outside, measure them, and then go on the line. And I put everything down there, and I submitted and everything.
Yeah. Sorry, somebody else saying something.
If you haven't logged in, then you won't see them.
Well, I did. Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, actually log in.
Yeah.
You have to log in to your name.
All right, sorry.
To your account, yes.
To your account.
Yes.
All
To
right,
see your own
okay.
trees.
Probably
Yes.
why I haven't seen them.
Yeah.
Give that a try, Chris. See if that
Yeah.
works.
Yeah, I will do.
I just want to, sorry, there's just a
Oh,
question
haven't
that we missed and we skipped over, but I don't know the answer to it. So if any of the lead verifiers know, it was Barry who asked, if you see a tree not on the inventory, but it is hidden, what happens if you try to record it? So say, yeah, you try to record the same tree as a different individual, what happens?
It will appear on the map as a new tree.
Okay.
You'll have a duplicate, one hidden and one showing.
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you.
And a verifier can go through the process of checking duplicate trees at any time and deleting ones that you then decide are duplicates. So that's another task that you as a verifier can do.
Yes. There's a very handy kind of verifier handbook that I'll be sharing as well with everybody, which is kind of like the Bible for verifiers. So it takes you through all of these kinds of tasks as well. So I'm just trying to be mindful of the time because I have to get back to my loved ones. But I just
one second question.
Almost breakfast
yes, of
time.
course.
Quite important for me.
Is it a quick question, Chris, or do you want to
It
put
is
it in?
very important to me because it matters for next Thursday. Because firstly, I work and I've got other things to do, and secondly, I live in very rural mid Wales, and there's very few veteran trees on the system. So I'd have great difficulty in both time and finding one to verify, because I live in very rural mid Wales.
It's not a problem, Chris. You might have to try to use the ATI and get the data off online. So
yeah,
find out.
I've got limited time as well because I work and I've got other things to do.
Yeah,
and I'd have to probably go too far away to do it, and I don't have time for that.
No,
could you not use the tree that you put on in your garden? Didn't you say you put two on in your garden?
Yeah, but I didn't think you could verify. Oh, can you?
Of course you can.
Oh, I'll do them then.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Saves you a job. Oh, well done, whoever said that.
Yeah, I didn't think you'd be able to do that.
No, that's brilliant.
Thank you. I didn't know that.
Yes, so if you're struggling, might as well just put one on in your back garden then, and then you can.
That's a good one. I didn't realise.
Try the verifying process.
Yeah, thank you.
I think we're done now, mate.
Yeah. Okay. Let's wrap it up.
Right. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everybody.
See you next week.
Thank you, everyone.
See you next week. Bye.
Bye.
See you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.